If you're a pop culture junkie who loves TV, film, music, comedy, and other really important stuff, then you've come to the right place. Get ready and settle in for Classic Conversations, the best pop culture interviews in the world. That's right, we circled the globe so you don't have to. If you're ready to be the king of the water cooler, then you're ready for Classic Conversations with your host, Jeff Dwoskin.
All right, Phyliss, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. You get the show going each and every week, and this time was no exception. Welcome, everybody, to episode 147 of Classic Conversations. As always, I am your host, you guessed it, Jeff Dwoskin. Great to have you back for another classic episode full of conversation. Not just a clever name. I'm excited to keep the comedy train going this week with my special guest, Joe Starr. Joe Starr is an amazing comedian that I had the opportunity to work with in 2007 at Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle. I've stayed in touch with Joe over the years via Facebook, where he documents, basically he's a comedy historian. So on top of being super hilarious himself, Joe is full of a million comedy stories. He shares stories about Bob Hope, David Letterman, Jerry Lewis, Phyliss Dyler, and so much more. This is an amazing episode. I'm really excited to share it with you. Got to catch up with an old friend, got to be educated on the history of comedy. So much greatness coming up in just a few seconds. But before we get to that, just want to remind everyone, episode 146 with the legendary Robert Klein. Robert Klein joined me. So many great stories. If you love comedy, you owe it to yourself to check out episode 146 with Robert Klein. That conversation, this conversation with Joe Starr, I'll probably have to send you a certificate of comedy excellence achievement that you can print out and put on your wall. It'll be suitable for framing. It'll be amazing. Oh, look what I earned from listening to Classic Conversations with these amazing comedians. All your friends will be so jealous. Well, without further ado, here's my conversation with actor and comedian Joe Starr. Enjoy. All right, everyone, I'm excited to introduce you to my next guest, comedian, actor, writer, ladies and gentlemen, the legendary Joe Starr.
Well, thank you. What an introduction. That's awesome.
I know. I like to bring everyone on in style.
You're a classy man.
Joe and I go back quite a bit. We worked a weekend together in 2007. How much time has gone by is inconceivable to me. But I was Joe's feature at Mark Ridley's Comedy Castle,
the castle
in 2007, where you wowed the audiences.
I think they were wowed that there was a door center stage. That fascinates me about that club, that there's a door center stage that you walk right out onto the stage. That's great.
Well, interesting thing that you think that's weird. That's the first club I ever played.
Really?
So I thought that was normal. Well, that's where I did my open mics. And when I came up, that was like the club that I would do every week. So when I started going to clubs that were like, no, you're like behind this thing and you got to climb over that. And you got to, I go, there's no door? You just don't walk out on stage? They're like, like, what are you talking about? I'm like, there's no like nice little green room, right? They're like, I mean, you can sit on that box if you want to sit on that box. Sure. But like, it was like, that to me was normal. And then when I started going everywhere else and realizing it wasn't normal, I was just like, well, what's going on?
Welcome to show business, kid. It's like that joke of the three comics get into a car accident and they die on the way to a gig. So they end up at the pearly gates. There's a long line of people waiting to get to St. Peter. And they walk right past the whole line. They walk right up to the front. And they go to walk right around St. Peter. He goes, where are you going? This is where the comics. And he goes, oh, go this way. You'll see the kitchen. Cut through there. You'll come out through a hallway. Of course, we can't walk through a front door, right?
Oh, man, that's funny. The one thing I remember about you is you had so many stories. The one that kind of just always stuck with me, I guess, is one where you talked about the lights going out. You still did the show. And then you had a propensity for getting standing ovations, which you earned, which you deserved. But
it's a propensity. That was in, I remember where that was and why it was so important. That was in the Kansas City Improv. I heard they've moved. I haven't been there in a long time, but I was at the Kansas City Improv, and it was Christmas time. It was about 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas, and the place was packed. The MC went up, and he did his time. Show was going great, and then the middle went up, and the MC went back up to bring me up, and he had a bit that ended with a very big punchline that he would do in between the feature and the closer. And he hit the punchline, and the lights went out. It was like perfect timing, and he thought we were messing with him. He thought we shut the lights off. So all the lights go out. Even the audience thought it was part of his act because it was so perfectly timed.
That's funny.
And then about a minute goes by, and wait staff is running by. You can barely see in the room. It's only lit now by the tea light, those little candles on the tables. So it's a dim room. We're like, oh, there's a blackout. We looked out on the parking lot was black, and it was jet black, and somebody was trying to make phone calls, and we found out that like half the city had blacked out. I don't know why. I don't know what transformers went or whatever the problem was. The middle runs back on stage and starts telling jokes in the dark to the audience, just street jokes. 2 guys walk into a bar, just telling street jokes to kill some time while we got on top of the light problem. And the lights never came back on. In the back of the room, I see the waitresses just crestfallen. This was going to be a huge tip night because it was such a great night and it was packed, and they're going to have to cancel the rest of the show. And my mom was a waitress when I was a kid, and we were so close to Christmas. And I said, no, I'm going on. And I ran backstage, ran out onto the stage. The MC's out there. He couldn't even see me. It was pitch black. And I said, introduce me. Who is that? It's me. So now we're yelling. There's no mic because the electricity's off. And he just screams an introduction, and I went into my act. And I did about an hour and 15 into that room was like a big 350, 400 seat room. It was gigantic. And the ceilings were really high. I remember that. It wasn't like a regular comedy club with a low ceiling. So I'm belting it out as hard as I can for about an hour and 15, hour and 20. And just as my voice was breaking, the lights came back on. And there was this weird moment where the audience realized they'd been listening to me in the dark for an hour and 20 minutes, had never seen me. The lights came on, and they realized now they could see me. And I was drenched. I was physically drenched in sweat from belting it out. I was like I was singing opera for an hour and 20 minutes. And as soon as the lights came on, I kind of didn't collapse, but I sat down onto the stool on stage just from exhaustion. And I got this beautiful, beautiful ovation from the people. That was just wonderful. And then I figured, well, there'll be no second show. I mean, who would be coming during a blackout? So I said, I got to do, 5 more minutes and we'll get out of here. And they're screaming, no. And I look at the manager, and the manager's like, well, we don't think there's going to be another show. So I did another 40. I came to about 2 hours total. And then I ended, and my voice was shot. It was almost totally gone. And the crowd's leaving. We walk out, and there's 14 people lined up for the second show. They came anyway. They were already out to dinner and then came after the blackout. And he said, these people really want to see you. I go, come on, man. I just did 2 hours, an hour and 20 with no mic, And I said, I'll make you a deal. If they want to sit at the bar, I will make all of them laugh. I'm not going to get up on the stage again. If we do get up on the stage, I got 20 minutes left. My voice is going to be shot. And we did a second show. And the MC did 5. The middle did 10. I was going to do 20. And I ended up doing almost an hour. I just felt bad. I couldn't let them not have a show. I did almost an hour. And then that applause from the second show, that meant a little more to me than even the first show. Even though the first show had seen me do that, the near impossible of filling that kind of space with sound for an hour and 20 with no mic. But that second audience, to me personally, that meant the most because that was like running a marathon as a comedian to do the 2 shows like that. But that's what that was.
What a consummate professional you are. So let me ask you something, Joe. How many years into your career at this point?
Was that?
Yeah.
That story? I started in the clubs early 90s, 1990, 91. And this we're talking about had to be 2005, right? 2000. Yeah, I would think 2005. So
15 years.
Yeah, 15 years.
Ish.
Yeah, 15 years-ish.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That was a great show. That was a great show. But that's the one you're talking about, yeah.
That is a great story. And it's cool that you did so long for the second. It's once you probably started going, you just can't stop. It's like comedy's a little bit like a drug, right? In that sense. It's
yeah, and I'm an old school, I'm a very old school guy in that there's certain things I like. If you get on stage, if you're supposed to do 40 and you hit an hour and 20, you're a ham. You're just being a ham. You're a stage hog at that point. But if you only have to do 20 and you do like a 45, 50, almost an hour, to give those people a show, that's not being a ham. I think that's being a professional, like you said. Like I've never turned my back physically on an audience ever. I just can't. No matter what the joke is, I will not turn around and turn my back to an audience. It's little things like that I think the old school guys, they're important to them, you know?
So I'll tell you this story that parallels your story, but in no way is as triumphant as your story, but you'll appreciate it. And you may be the only person ever I met that would. Tell me. Tell it to. Quick break. Want to thank everyone for their support of the sponsors. When you support the sponsors, you're supporting us here at Classic Conversations, and that's how we keep the lights on. And now back to my interview with Joe Starr. I interrupted myself, actually. I was about to tell you a really cool story. All right, let's get back to it. So it was a two-man show. I'm supposed to do 20 minutes, and then the headliner does his show, right? So I'm going up. I go to do my set, and to let you know, to be perfectly honest, I'm halfway through my 20 minutes. I'm really thankful this is going to be over in 10 minutes because this isn't the greatest set I've ever had in my life. Okay.
Yeah.
I get this wave and a little note that says the headliner's not here yet. We need you to keep going. Mm-hmm. Keep going. I'm thinking to myself, oh my God, of all the nights, right? Where you're not, this was early. So like you're finding your voice. Sometimes you click. Sometimes you're not as clicked into the audience.
Right.
30 minutes in, they're like, he's not here yet. I'm like, okay. Now keep in mind, I am only being paid to do 20 minutes. I am only supposed to do 20 minutes. Frankly, I probably only was able to do 20 minutes at this time, okay? But in my head, I think to myself, and then at some point they stopped even updating me. They gave up. And so in my head, though, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? These people don't know that this is it. Mm-hmm. They think this is the show. If I were to leave right now, which I have every right to do, they're going to want their money back. The show is going to be ruined. And frankly, even if I'm not great, at least they'll be like, oh, I guess that was the show. Right, you know what I mean? Like, at least in their heads, it would have been something.
Right.
So I think I did 50 minutes. When I say I did 50 minutes, I don't mean I did 50 minutes like you did 2 hours. I mean, somehow I pulled out my sheet of paper of everything I've ever written ever and got through a bunch of stuff, right?
Right.
I shouldn't say I did 50 minutes. I filled 50 minutes, which completely different.
I got you.
Right?
I got you.
Okay. But I felt good about myself because I felt like I was doing a service. You know what I mean? I felt like this guy didn't show up.
Sure.
Turns out they actually never invited him. They forgot to tell him the show was going on. So it wasn't like it was a no-show or anything. It was their kind of snafu.
Wow.
They gave me maybe an extra 100, maybe. Like, I'm thinking to myself, I probably should have gotten more. I mean, I didn't, it wasn't not for the quality, but for the fact that I just kind of saved them from probably a lot of people asking for refunds.
Yeah.
Because these people didn't know. It wasn't like they came here to see that guy or something like that. They just came and there was comedy. So anyway, that's my low rent version of your story.
I can back up further in my career with times when, almost everything that can happen during a show has gone wrong when you're around long enough. But I think the oddest thing, I just talked about this recently to somebody, was this one club I did on Staten Island in New York. It was like in a strip mall. It was a small little club. And a guy, an older gentleman, backed his car right through the window of the club. He came into the club in his car. Now, I'd never even, while it happened.
He was really excited. I hear Joe Starr is going to be here.
He comes right through the wall, through the glass and the wall. And I was picking glass out of my hair. And I looked at the audience and I said, who ordered the pizza? Did anybody order a pizza? Because this guy's here. And I thought of the, do you know the Shecky Green story from Vegas when he crashed his car into the fountain in front of Caesar's Palace?
No.
In the 60s?
No.
So he was known for his gambling and his drinking, and he was driving his car in a strip, ends up crashing his car into the fountains that were in front of Caesar's Palace. The cops come flying down the street, lights are going. The cops walk over to his car that's in the middle of the fountain, and he rolled down the window and said, "No wax." That's a line. That's a great line for a situation like that. But
That's
everything
so
goes
funny.
wrong over time, People not showing up, or, when you open for someone. And have you ever run into a situation where the MC is just killer and the middle is just killer, and you go up and you're going, "Oh, I'm going to ride this wave. This is going to be perfect." And for some reason, the bottom drops out of the audience because they're exhausted from 45 minutes already before you get up there. That happened to me one of the first times I ever closed a room. Was the middle was great. The MC was great. The air conditioning went out in the middle of the feature, and there was such a great crowd. They were packed in this club. It worked up into such a frenzy. By the time I hit the stage, 20 minutes later, the temperature of the room was probably 30 degrees hotter than it was before the middle went up. So they were drenched, and they physically were afraid to pass out. So I was performing. It was just a waste of time. They were not going to have any more fun. It was just miserable. It was miserable. Ice and drinks were melting before it got to the table. It was horrible.
Was it also Friday by any chance?
Yeah, it was Friday's second show. I didn't do the first show, only the second. Yeah.
That on top of everything, right? Because everyone's tired, and then when you add heat to it.
That's right.
I remember going to Vegas. This isn't a comedy story. This is paying a lot of money to see a show story. And it was the one where the Cirque du Soleil with the water.
Mm-hmm.
So, water, this chlorine, right? So we went, you think like, oh, the 10:30 show, what a great idea when you're buying the tickets 3 months in advance, but you're tired because you're jet lagged and it's warm and the chlorine. The only thing I remember from that show is, that state where you think you're awake, but you're like your eyes are shutting and you're nodding up and down, and you think in your head you're alert, but you're really like in a half state of sleep.
Yeah.
And thinking to myself, I can't believe how much I paid for this. I gotta stay up. Heat is the killer of any show. That is my point. I feel you.
You're right. Bob Hope used to travel with a giant thermometer when he did theaters. And the theater had to be, I think it was 64 degrees. It had to be 64 degrees or he wouldn't take the stage. Because a cold audience is an awake audience. That's why the Ed Sullivan Theater is so cold, where they do the late show. The same exact reason. Ed Sullivan kept it at 64 degrees.
I'm going to write that into my
your writer in your contracts.
I need a sandwich in 64 degrees. I always used to joke about that with the club owners. When you're a nobody, it's funny to joke about the headliner level stuff. It's like I'd look in there and the owner would be there, and I'd be like, "You're not filming this. I'm not going on." What I mean, I knew the guy, right? But I mean, it's like, yeah.
There are some,
okay, Jeff.
Yeah. Sure. There are guys that we've all heard the stories through the years of odd things in the riders. And my request when I was doing the road a lot, back when I was working with you and I was doing the road a lot for a couple of years, and they would ask, "Do you want anything?" Like the agents would be, "You want me to put anything in the contract?" No, I just tell the club owner I want the best feature he's got. That was all I wanted. I wanted the best feature, and then I want the best MC that they've got in that club. And I roll into a city, and when you're coming up, you start featuring. Every now and then there'll be a couple of headliners that'll call you over on the first night. You know the bit you do about the hospital? Yeah, don't do that because I have a bit like that. That kind of talk.
Right.
You shouldn't be closing if that's an issue for you. But that's my personal opinion. When I started closing on the road, I would call over the feature. I said, "Do me a favor." And they were waiting for the "don't do this, don't do that." And I go, I got a small request for you. When you are done and get off the stage, I want them to think the show is over. I want you to absolutely annihilate this audience. Take every bit of energy out of them. Destroy. I do not want to be able to follow you. Like, really? Yeah. Pull out all the stops. Absolutely destroy. And then I tell the MC the same thing. Don't make it possible for this guy to follow you. I want the two of you to be done and for this audience to think we got to pay the check and go home now because it's done. Then I go to work. Because then it's challenging. Then it makes the whole show better. If everybody's the best they can, it just elevates the whole show. Instead of trying to hold back the feature or the MC and don't do this and don't do that. That's ridiculous.
Absolutely. I tell you, it's funny that you say that about the material. Don't do certain material. Mm-hmm. I used to always avoid everyone before the first show, usually like whatever the Thursday show, because my thinking was if he didn't give me that speech or if the headliner didn't give me that speech, I had one shot to get out everything I wanted to get out for the weekend.
Wow.
You know what I mean? And then I could always change something based on hearing. It would be wrong for me. I always thought if you did like a hospital bit and then I did that after, like the next show, I added that to my set, I feel like that would have been wrong.
Right.
But if I get out there and I do my bits and this bit and that bit,
Right.
now you got to just follow it and you got to deal with it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
and it was more likely that the headliner would not say anything to me because I got the material out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Everyone did their sets.
That's smart. That's really smart.
I like that. I got to say, like, I think one of the best shows I ever had, I was headlining a show. I should say I was closing a show. You're a headline. I was closing a show.
Okay.
And the guy before me blew the frickin' roof off the thing and had a little bit different vibe than me.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like I was going to come in much lower key.
Sure.
And I ended up changing my first 5 minutes to kind of just ride the wave better.
Mm-hmm.
And that became like the way I opened every show moving forward from that point forward.
Wow.
Like it just became like the perfect way to just kind of go into
Yeah,
it.
absolutely.
And so,
that's something the new guys, really new people in the business, they learn the hard way. But it's something I've suggested a long time where let's say like a showcase night and there's 9 people going up and some local hotshot walks in and they bump people a little bit to make room for him to do 15. The person who follows him is usually terrified if they're a newer comic. And I tell all of them, listen, all that guy has done, he got the crowd to 36,000 feet. That's where they are. Now, you keep thinking you got to land the plane and take off again. They're at 36,000 feet. Just sit at the controls and keep flying. You're already up there. The hard work is done. The audience is off the ground. And just take over from that momentum. And like you said, that first 5-10 minutes, yeah, you cruised and you brought it to your altitude. That's because you're a consummate showman. You know what you're doing,
Oh, just 2 consummate showmen having a podcast together right now.
That's a great name for a podcast, isn't it? 2 consummate gentlemen.
All right, we should do that. I tell you, the funniest thing I ever saw, and I didn't watch a lot of Full House, but there is an episode where Dave Coulier in the show is getting his big HBO shot in the show, and Phyliss Dyler walks into the club and they let her go on, and then they do one of those where they, the time jump thing, and it's like an hour and a half later.
Sure. Oh, that's great.
And then he goes up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I think if you were to follow someone huge and you could hold your own, like you said, just maintain that, like that's what that could make you, right? It's like, oh my God, he went up after, what's his name?
Absolutely.
And he just blew, he just continued the momentum. It seems like that would be a really good thing.
Letterman used to do that all the time at the Comedy Store. When Pryor would stop in, Letterman begged to follow him because he knew there was nobody bigger at the time. And he was going to take every bit of energy out of that audience. And Dave wanted to start from that, to really test out his material. Some people, it's a good way to learn for most people.
So what kind of led you to comedy, Joe? How did you start doing stand up? And then, how did you then parlay that to acting? And then we can dive into some examples.
Well, when I was a kid, it goes beyond me. My grandfather was in Vaudville. He was a dancer in the 1920s. He was in show business for a while. And then Vaudville kind of went to the wayside. He became a civil engineer. And the showbiz bug skipped my father. He didn't want to be in the business. But growing up, even as a kid, I was always studying comedy, not just laughing at comedy. Even when my earliest memories are watching, an old Chaplin movie or the Marx Brothers or Phyliss Dyler or anybody picking apart, not intentionally, just understanding what they were doing comedically. And I always knew I'd be in show business. On some level, I wanted to be part of that kind of fun. And when I was 15, my father took me to a comedy club for the first time because comedy clubs were everywhere in the 80s. I saw my first comedy show, stand-up show. And I thought to myself, I can do this. I can do this. Graduated high school. When I was 17, 2 weeks later, I was in a club, signing up for Mike nights and that kind of thing. How it is to get in stand-up. It's like erosion. It's like you're getting by osmosis. You're just there and you slowly, it's like becoming part of the Borg. You just slowly assimilate you become part of the big hive mentality. And then I was just in stand-up, but I always had a knack for stand-up, but acting I knew was something I was going to need to study. And after a couple of years of quite a bit of stand-up, then I started taking acting lessons. I was given a scholarship to study at the Joanna Bexon Studios in New York City. And she was Ray Romano's first acting coach. Colin Quinn studied with her. And I was fortunate enough to study with her for years. And we went on to be friends and, very close friends and colleagues. We worked on a few other things together, and then the acting led to auditions and an agent, and then audition. It's a numbers game after that.
Sorry to interrupt the interview with Joe Starr. Got to take a quick break. And we're back. Let's get back to the interview with Joe Starr. He just told us how to get to Carnegie Hall. Audition. I may have that. Anyway, all right, back to the interview.
Talent is just enough to get you in the door, but man, it's a numbers game after that.
How many auditions do you feel you go on for every role that you do land?
Early on, I had a really high batting average. And I don't know if it's because I've always been an old soul, and people were shocked that they didn't know who I was when they first met me. They figured I had been around a while and they didn't know me. But at the beginning, I had an embarrassingly high batting average. The first commercial I ever went in for, I landed it. The first television pilot I ever read for, I almost landed the lead in it, in a series. First movie I ever went in an audition for was World Trade Center. I got a role in that. So my first things were I was landing them one after another. And of course, as an idiot who's new to that field of the business, I went, why is everybody complaining that it's so hard to get work? I got 4 gigs in a row, And
yeah, you got to keep that to yourself, I imagine.
Yeah. And then after that,
it's like the waiter who's like, I'm getting all these tips. I'm doing so well. It's like
exactly. So that's what I was doing stand-up 14 years, still had a day job, and worked only in the tri-state area of New York, Connecticut, New Jersey. I never traveled more than 150 miles from my house because there was that much stand-up back then.
Right.
And then I got the Montreal Comedy Festival, and that changed everything. That was in 2004. That changed everything.
So when you say that changed everything, talk me through that. Like what happened?
The festival, the Montreal Comedy Festival, is still the largest comedy festival in the world. It takes over Montreal for 2 weeks, the second and third week of July every year. And the entire industry is there. The entire industry. In film, in television, now in streaming media. There are suits up there from the studios and the networks and producers and then writers, and they have actors in the short comedy film competition. So there's a lot of people, thousands of people just in the industry that are there. So if you're lucky and you get a good break on a great show, because they have so many performances going on during those 2 weeks, you can become like the buzz of the festival. So all at once, within 2 weeks, the whole industry knows you at once. It's not that you had one meeting and it went well, and then they talked to somebody else. You had a second meeting. This is like having 100 meetings at one time. I was up there 2000. I performed 2001, 2, 3, 4, and 5. I performed the festival 5 years in a row, which was it still is incredibly rare for anybody other than Dom Herrera. Dom has done every single one of them. He's been there since the beginning. He's done every one. Did those 5 years, and the industry saw me, and that led to more auditions for television and then film and like that.
Do you focus more on TV or film these days? Or you don't care as long as it's
It's funny, as you get older, you get far less picky because the jobs get further apart. So, you go in for anything you think you, quote unquote, fit the suit. They're looking for a blue collar, kind of middle-aged, average guy. I'm right in there. If they're looking for a, 6'6" chiseled surfer, I'm not going to go in for that part. So, your type and you go in for everything. But the auditionings change as you get older. Of course, I remember they asked Bill Murray, right after Lost in Translation, which was a great movie. They asked him, to what do you attribute this, sudden surge in the, people looking out for a Bill Murray? And I remember him saying, I'm not more talented than anybody else. I just hung on longer than they did. So now when they look for a Bill Murray type, I'm the only one left. He's it. He's the only one who fits the bill. And he's right. As you look at older and older actors or people who've been around longer and longer, there's very few of them of the same type. The ones who are specific hung on. And there's only one Christopher Walken. There's only one Pacino. There's only one Meryl Streep. You got to hang in there.
So what was it like on World Trade Center working with Oliver Stone? Did you get to work with Oliver Stone on this?
Yeah, he was incredibly gracious to me. Incredibly gracious. I didn't know what to expect. He was taller than I thought he was. He's very tall. He's like 6'1" or 6'2". Very tall man. And he was overly nice to me. I had no credits when I went in for that audition. I had never done anything. My bio was basically my stand-up bio. And what interested him was, it says you're the grandson of a vaudevillian. Because, you don't hear the word vaudeville anymore. And I said, yeah. And my grandfather was a dancer. And this was only for 2 or 3 lines. It's the first 2 or 3 lines in the movie. An average guy on a subway. And the scene was with Jay Hernandez, who's now, Magnum PI. I auditioned for these 3 lines, and that was that. And I figured I was going to get the thank you for coming in. We'll let you know. And instead, he had what the big script, his big book, he shut it. And he said, do you improvise? I said, sure, yeah. And he had me improvise with the script reader for like 10 minutes. So I just started I was slipping jokes in there, just being funny. And he was laughing. He was having a great time for these 3 little lines at the beginning of a movie. The next morning, my agent called and says, oh, wow, he loved you. He sent, his assistant sent this email over saying how much he enjoyed his time with me and he looks forward to working with me. It was really, he didn't have to do that. And then he had me into the city for rehearsals. Let's rehearse the scene. 3 lines. What do we, during that time, I'm sitting with him and Jay and we go through the 3 lines and then the 2 of them start talking and I figure, I guess I'm supposed to leave now. And Mr. Stone turned to me and said, what do you think? And we talked about this scene. It was really interesting how he wanted my opinion. It felt valued. And then we shot that subway scene, the opening in Brooklyn somewhere, up on an elevated track. And it was so cold when we shot it. It was freezing that morning. Call time was like, I think 4:45 or 5 a.m. because the scene had to be shot while the sun was rising. So we got there really early. I had a trailer. He liked the Yankee shirt that I wore in the audition, so he told me to wear that. So I show up wearing like a Yankee windbreaker thin thing with a T-shirt underneath, and that's it. And it's like 25 degrees. I was too stupid to bring a jacket. So then I'm called up. He's setting up the camera, and he saw me, and he's like, hey, Joe. And I went over, hey, Mr. Stone, how are you? He starts to give me this lesson in lighting. I couldn't believe it. I realized, wow, he's giving me a crash course in lighting. So he's talking about he wanted the light. When the sun comes up, it's going to bounce off that building. And it's going to light this part of the tracks really well because the train's going to come this way. And he sees I'm kind of shivering a little bit. And he had on this big Parker jacket with a big fur-lined hood and it went down to the floor. Like the whole crew had them. And there's a lot of extras there standing there waiting for us to get shooting. And he says, do you want someone to get your jacket? I didn't want to look like an idiot. So I go, no, I'm fine.
You're freezing your ass.
Yeah, I don't get cold. No, I'm fine. My lips are blue. There's icicles on my eyebrows. I'm fine. And about 3 minutes later, he goes, Joe, do you want a coat? And I go, I'm just fine. And he pulls me in closer and he whispers, you're in a major motion picture directed by Oliver Stone. If you want a coat, they'll get you a coat. So I said, well, maybe I'd like a coat. And then he yells, Mr. Starr would like a coat. And 5 minutes later, I'm in a big Parker with a fur-lined hood and the jacket went down to the floor. And he says, would you like some hot chocolate? I said, I would like some hot chocolate. Mr. Starr would like some hot chocolate. 5 minutes later, I'm holding a giant thermos of hot chocolate. And he was so overly gracious to me. And then the sun was coming up. Now we're getting ready, to shoot. And he says, come on, let's take the walk. I go, what walk? He said, the actor's walk. I said, okay. I didn't know what that was. So me and him walked maybe 100 yards on this platform by ourselves, away from everybody. And he said, so tell me about this character that you're playing. I said, guy on the train? And I keep thinking, it's only 3 lines. And I said, the guy I'm playing? He says, of course. And I was curious. I said, why? Why does it matter what I think? I said, why? And he said, the way you're going to choose to play it is determining how I'm going to come across him with the camera. I said, what do you mean? He goes, okay, do we open cold on you reading the newspaper over Jay's shoulder, standing up at the pole? Or is Jay sitting down and you're hovering over him like a hawk looking down? Or does the camera float through the crowd on the train and we find you? You're going to tell me how we find you. So I started to tell him the few ideas I had of the character, which you wouldn't think for 3 lines was important. And I told him the whole thing. We walk all the way back and he said, okay, now I know how I'm going to do it. I'm going to float the camera. I'm going to have somebody walk right in front of you, the 2 of you, and the camera's going to just settle on you, the 2 of you reading as if you're friends. And not until you say your lines do we realize you don't even know him. You're just reading his newspaper over his shoulder. So that really I thought about that for a long time after, like, wow, the minutia that a director, it's not just the angle of the camera and just the lighting and the sound. The actors creating these characters are a big part of it. He was very, very sweet to me over those 3 lines.
It's amazing how much small minutia goes into everything you see. Like everything has a reason. At least probably, well, for someone like Oliver Stone, it probably does.
Sure.
Maybe there's some people that just go,
yeah. It's 4:00. All right, cut. That was great.
Did you get to hang with, was anyone else in your scene, or like when you were done?
No, that was it. We were done within about 3 hours just for that one shoot. Jay was very nice to me. But that day of the audition, the week prior, not the audition, of the rehearsal, the week earlier when I didn't know why I was there, as I was leaving, when we were all done, Mr. Stone walked me back toward the elevator. We're going in the same direction. And then my cell rang. I picked up my phone. I'm talking to someone waiting for the elevator. And then I hear Mr. Stone say my name. I turn around, and he was in the middle of introducing me to Nicolas Cage. In the middle of it. I went, oh, hi, Nick. and he's like, hi, are we in a scene together, man? And I went, no, we're not actually. I'm in the very beginning of, and Mr. Stone said, no, I just wanted you to meet him. That's all. But it was very nice that I got to shake hands with Nick Cage. You know, that was really nice.
That's cool. I always use handshaking as the definitive you met someone. Mm-hmm. Like if you walk by and someone just goes, hello, you know what I mean? You didn't really meet them.
Sure.
And if you shake their, like Mickey Rooney, I was at the Townsend in Birmingham, Michigan.
Yeah.
Townsend is like this fancy hotel where all the famous people stay, like sports people, they all stay there. And so Mickey Rooney was there, and I see Mickey Rooney.
Wow.
He was the wizard in the Wizard of Oz in the play. Mm-hmm. He was doing in the play. And so I walked up to him and I'm like, Mr. Rooney. And I shook his hand, and he gives me a funny look, and I'm thinking to myself, you should be happy that someone my age knows exactly who you are without, I didn't say this. In my head. And like you know what I mean though? Like without a hesitation, I knew exactly, you know what I mean? A certain age group, my kids would have no idea, right? I mean, like right. Certain age, at some point, you know, unfortunately,
sure.
Some of the classic people, you wouldn't necessarily know who they were.
That's one of the reasons why I really become kind of this unofficial historian in some ways of stand-up and show business in general on Long Island and in New York. Not just because I have such reverence for Vaudeville, but we have to know whose shoulders we stand on. We have to. And there's people who, I've met some young or newer comedians in the last 5, 6, 7 years who really believe stand-up started with Sam Kinison. Started. That there was no stand-up before Sam Kinison. I've met some new comics who are now 21, 22 years old, never heard of Richard Pryor. Now, how sad is that? Right. Yeah, never heard of Richard Pryor. And then when I do talk to some of those guys, and the guys who want to be real edgy, like Carlin or like Pryor, and I always say, you know, Pryor and Carlin didn't start out to be the people they ended up being. I say, what you should do is find out who inspired them and keep going back. Richard Pryor wanted to be Jerry Lewis in the worst way. That's what he wanted to be. He wanted to be Jerry Lewis. Carlin wanted to be Danny Kaye. That's who he wanted to be. As a young teenager, when he knew he wanted to do something in show business and comedy, he wanted to be Danny Kaye. Now, if there's new comics who've never even heard of Pryor, they sure haven't heard of Jerry Lewis and haven't heard of Danny Kaye. And there's, then who inspired Danny Kaye and who inspired Jerry? And I think there's a homework that it's part of the due diligence of being a full-rounded entertainer.
And we'll get to your Facebook in a minute, because I know that's one of the things that sort of, Facebook's great for keeping people in touch, but one of the things that really kept you top of mind, like, even though it's been so long since we've actually seen each other, is, and I think I DM'd you once this thing, how much I enjoy all your long posts on things and retro introspectives on things. Who do you think the top people are? Who do you think the 3 people are? You don't have to pick 3, but whatever. Okay. Who do you think the top people are that you think are being forgotten that need to be remembered?
Phyliss Dyler, only because what Joan Rivers had done, Joan was absolutely the step after Phyliss Dyler. But Phyliss was kind of I got to word this right. Phyliss was kind of the fruition of something started prior to her, kind of by Martha Raye. Remember, a woman doing stand-up, let's say in the 50s, was incredibly rare. Incredibly rare. Women weren't even supposed to be at a bar by themselves back then, So women doing stand-up like Rusty Warren or Pearl Williams, they were doing risque musical kind of comedy acts at a piano, but they were underground because they were the Blue albums. They were, but mainstream, Martha Raye, who, I'm like in my head, I can't help but keep backing up, but I use Phyliss Dyler as the break for a reason. Prior to her, you had people who were in vaudeville. Fanny Brice, who was a woman in vaudeville. Gracie Allen. There were a few females, women that became kind of famous in vaudeville, usually as a double act. Fanny Brice was a single, but usually as a double act, usually as a husband and wife or a boy and girl act. Phyliss raised her children and came to show business later. She was in her 40s when she came to stand up. She didn't start as a teenager. So she was in her 40s. She was a middle-aged woman whose basically her first shot was at the Purple Onion in San Francisco. And it went so well. I think she was contracted for 2 weeks, I believe. She was held over for over a year. That's how popular it was to see this woman who was that funny. So Phyllis's career has to be studied by sociologists, and not just by female comics, but any comic should be studying her career because of what she did. She came late to the game and was a woman, and she dressed the way she did simply to fight off the whole being a woman thing. She didn't want to have to deal with that on a business level, though she was a classically trained pianist and an incredibly smart woman, along the lines of kind of as like Lucille Ball, who Lucille became this businesswoman that was not to be crossed, not to be trifled with, because also she was not a kid. She got I Love Lucy. She was 41. So she was not a kid when she got that, But I think Phyllis's career should be studied very much. I would say also Jack Benny and George Burns, their friendship should be studied. Not just their careers, but their friendship, because it was such a rare thing in comedy. Laurel and Hardy, who loved each other, Burns and Benny loved each other. There weren't that many close friendships in the world of comedy. Friends with a singer or an actor, yes, but two comedians being that close was a rare thing, and it still is incredibly rare that people get that close in the business with their best friends. But also, I wrote a post about Timmy Rogers. I'm surprised how many people don't know him until I realized why would they? Timmy Rogers was called the Jackie Robinson of comedy because he was discovered by Jackie Gleason, who gave him his first shot on national television. The same he did for Pat Cooper. I talked to Pat about that years ago. I opened for Pat a bunch of times, and Pat's big break was because Gleason loved him and put him on his show. And Timmy Rogers, he was the first he was the only black entertainer I know who didn't wear blackface in Vaudeville, which is astounding. He was so funny and so talented, they let him get away with it, which is incredible. A lot of people, of course, don't know that black entertainers had to wear blackface when they performed in Vaudeville, which was, that's just astoundingly, it's beyond racist. That's just psychopathic. That's,
I didn't know that. Yeah. And that does not.
Yeah. And but there were comics like Pigmeat Markham. Pigmeat Markham had to work in blackface. His natural skin color was darker than the makeup. So he actually lightened up when he put on the blackface. It's just so stupid that he had to do it. But, Timmy Rogers, I think people have really forgotten about. We lost Rusty Warren just because I mentioned it before. She just passed away 2 years ago, maybe, or not many years ago. And her album Knockers Up it's a tour de force of comedy for a woman of that era. It's just so brave. It's kind of what Mrs. Maisel, taking bits and parts from Phyllis, from Joan, Phyliss Dyler, Joan Rivers, Rusty Warren, Pearl Williams, these women who were, naughty. They were considered a dirty act. It was subversive, back then. But there's a whole lot of stand-up and comedians that should be studied just for the endurance. I mean, not just for the material. Look at Jack Carter's career, or Hackett, or Buddy Hackett's career, or like I said, Martha Raye before, or what she did personally. Martha Raye is the only civilian buried in a military cemetery with honors from two separate branches of the military. There is nobody else, just her. So that should be studied. I mean, people should know that. I think you should study every piece of comedy that was ever shot on black and white, and every piece of comedy ever put on vinyl.
Joe, have you ever thought about writing a book or something like that?
Yeah, I've been approached a couple of times. Right now I'm working on a one-man show, which is taking shape, on writing a one-man show, not actually doing it, but putting together a framework. And it's difficult because there's so much I've fallen in love with. That's what COVID has done. The pandemic did for me was, remember when the pandemic started, we thought it would be maybe a few weeks. Nobody knew, we thought it maybe a month, maybe 2 months. And there was a book on the psychology of humor that I had always wanted to read, and I couldn't find it. It was out of print. So I went on eBay, and I bought on eBay. Oh, this is what I'll read while we're in lockdown for 8 weeks or whatever it is. That led to me buying more and more books. The last year and a half, I have, through eBay, at like $2, $3, $4, have found a great collection which has helped me put together the material for a one-man show on 3 different parts of my love of comedy, which is the psychology of comedy, the philosophy of humor and comedy, and old joke books, but really old joke books. My oldest ones are from 1860s. So they're really, really old joke books. It's 3 different branches of the same subject. I don't know how I'm going to frame it together, but plus also the years I've been studying, I have a half a century of comedy in my head, of watching.
That's what I'm saying. You have so much. I mean, like, I've been following you on Facebook for over a decade, right? I mean, like,
yeah.
So much. I do want to kind of dive into one thing, which is your mentor and friend, Jerry Lewis.
Yeah.
I know you have a huge love of Jerry Lewis.
Yes, I do.
And I'd love you to talk about that for a few minutes.
Sure. Well, I'll start with this because I know that anybody who's listening, not anybody, but generally the feeling is when you mention his name, everybody brings up the fact that a comment that he said about women, he didn't think women should be performing comedy and he sees them as baby making machines and stuff. And I knew Jerry on two different levels. Now, I only knew Jerry for the last 5 years of his life. I knew him from, it was 85 till he passed away when he was 91. So 6 years. And I knew him in two different ways. There was, to me, when I met him, there was always one or the other. It was either Jerry Lewis, the guy I saw when I was a kid, and then there was Jerry Lewis, the businessman, who was a total, complete 180-degree difference than the guy who was the clown and the comedian. Corey Kahaney, who's a great comedian, somebody I respect very much. We were working in a casino once together, and it was right after it was right before Jerry passed away. And she said, I know you love him. I know you love him. But do you like him? It was a great way to put the question. And honestly, I loved him. I loved his work. I love what he did, his humanitarian work for MDA, the Muscular Dystrophy Association, as national chairman. You could not be admire him for that. But as a comedian, as a man, he could be mean. I saw him be mean plenty of times. But he was also an old man. I've seen plenty of old people be mean. It kind of comes with the age. I think once you're past 85, you get to say and do whatever you want. That's my personal opinion. He really gave me a great advice if I asked the right question. That's why he was a mentor to me. He didn't have time for, what was it like? Why did you and Dean break up? He didn't have time for those kind of silly questions. But when I asked him specific questions, like in the movie Hardly Working, I thought he took the hardest hit physically he ever took. And he was shocked that I noticed it. When I pointed out, he goes, nobody brings that up. And I said, but how did you not end up in the hospital? He goes, I did. Because he cracked his skull open on a fall onto the floor, but didn't stop the scene. He kept going through the scene with his head busted open. He was very kind and generous to me because he knew I had a love of the business and I had a great foundation of the history of the business. I found that as the older entertainer, I was really close with Alan King. Alan had no patience for anybody who was not in show business 35 years. You had to be in the business a long time for him to even look at you. And the only reason we became friends was he was shocked I knew as much about the history as I did when I was young. I was really young. I came into the business with the knowledge of it. But Jerry was always pushing me. Jerry was one of the first people to say I should write a book. He really did. He said, you can't be one of the last ones. There's more out there and they're not going to be exposed to it. His point was like when you and I were young, there were 5 channels, 6 channels, 7 channels. There were so few channels on television. Now with the internet, there's literally millions of channels, basically. So there's no focus of material. So if I don't write on Facebook about Timmy Rogers, who's going to hear about Timmy Rogers? If I don't write about, Martha Ray, who's going to talk about Martha Ray? There are others, but we're like islands now. We're so far apart and desolate from each other. So that's why I might write a book.
Well, you should definitely write a book. I mean, you have probably so many mini essays if you just even went through your Facebook. And
no, I know that. Yeah, I do.
So you probably have.
Yeah, I probably have written a book.
Yeah, you probably have a book. You're just not making any money. How did you meet Jerry Lewis?
I met him through Max Alexander, the great comedian Max Alexander, my other brother, who we've lost, unfortunately. Max and Jerry were almost like a father-son kind of a thing, closer than a mentor-student thing. Max grew up idolizing Jerry, and he had met him years before, and Max knew what a fan I was of Jerry's work and stuff. And then one day, Max sent me a text, and it said, Friars Club tomorrow, 11:30, JL. ? Like, do you want to go? Yeah. So I was outside the Friars Club at like 8:45 in the morning. I was there 2 hours early. I was not going to miss this chance. And that's how I met him. I met him when he was in New York at the Friars Club to celebrate his 85th birthday. That was the day I met him.
Joe, you are full of so many amazing stories. I can't thank you enough for sharing so many of them.
Thanks, Jeff. Well, thank you. It's nice to talk to somebody who knows the weight of the stories and the importance of them, Thank you.
Joe, how can people keep up with you on the social medias? Is Facebook the best place?
I guess right now on Facebook, I'm going to have a website soon, but The Real Joe Starr is my name on Facebook. I'm pretty easy to find, and it's a picture of me in the center and then Jerry Lewis over my shoulder, so easy to find. But that is the best way.
It's Jerry Lewis over your shoulder, and then the camera pans in and you realize Jerry Lewis doesn't actually know you. He's just reading your newspaper.
And Jeff Dwoskin brings it full circle, ladies and gentlemen. That's a man who knows how to have a podcast.
Thank you very much, Joe.
All right, everyone, the amazing Joe Starr, a man of many talents. It was great catching up with Joe. Check out his comedy when he comes to your town. All right, well, with the interview over, it can only mean one thing. That's right, it's time for another trending hashtag from the family of hashtags at hashtag roundup. Follow us on Twitter at hashtag roundup. Download the free, always free hashtag roundup app at the iTunes App Store or Google Play Store. Tweet along with us, and one day one of your tweets may show up on a future episode of Classic Conversations. Fame and fortune await you. The hashtag for this episode is hashtag best advice from a movie. Joe talked all about being an actor and learning the craft of acting. He talked about having a mentor and getting advice from Jerry Lewis. Advice, movies, put those together. Hashtag best advice from a movie. Yes, it has nothing to do with the specific movies Joe was in or Jerry Lewis, but I had to work with what I had. So we got a great hashtag best advice from a movie. Basically, what advice have you gotten that you can live your day by from your favorite movie? This is brought to us by Acidic Cherry Tags from Acidic Blonde on hashtag Roundup. All right, here's some awesome hashtag best advice from a movie tweets. Never say, who's there? It's me, Sydney. What's your favorite movie? Sorry. Get it? That's some great advice. Never say, who's there? All right, you're getting the feel for the hashtag, right? Here's some more great advice from a movie. There's no crying in baseball. Life moves pretty fast. If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you could miss it. Girls only want boyfriends who have great skills. I personally have nunchuck skills. One word, plastics. You get it? Hashtag best advice from a movie. If you got one, head to Twitter right now. Tweet it at us, at Jeff Dwoskin Show. I'll show you some Twitter love. Never go against the family. Be excellent to each other. That was an air guitar. Sorry, it was a little out of tune. Get a bigger boat. Do or do not. There is no try. I can do that better. Do. No, I guess I can't. Do or do. What am I trying to do? Do or do not. I can't. All right. Leave the gun. Take the cannoli. Never go in against a Sicilian when death is on the line. Never rub another man's rhubarb. See, these are awesome best advice from a movie tweets. Get busy living or get busy dying. Never put baby in the corner. Being yourself is overrated. Tell me about it, stud. Have what she's having. Yes. All right. You're welcome. Here's some great advice from a movie. The sun will come out tomorrow. You can bet your bottom dollar on that in our final hashtag best advice from a movie. If someone asks you if you're a god, you say yes. Whoa. All right. Do not cross the streams. Ooh, cross the streams. Our weekly live show at 9:30 on Wednesdays. Follow our YouTube channel. Quick plug. All right. Those are some awesome hashtag best advice from a movie tweets. Head over to Twitter. All those folks are retweeted. Show them some Twitter love. Tweet your own. You know the drill. All right. Well, that's the end of the hashtag. The interview's over. That can only mean one thing. Episode 147 has come to a close. I can't believe it. I want to thank my amazing guest, Joe Starr. And of course, I want to thank all of you for coming back week after week. It means the world to me. And I'll see you next time.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Classic Conversations. If you like what you heard, don't be shy and give us a follow on your favorite podcast app. Also, why not go ahead and tell all your friends about the show? You strike us as the kind of person that people listen to. Thanks in advance for spreading the word, and we'll catch you next time on Classic Conversations.